Welcome to the Juice Box with Juice Springsteen, covering the week that was in professional wrestling. And welcome to a very special edition of the Juice Box. I am Juice Springsteen. Before we really deep dive into today's discussion of Sting and his entire career, featuring myself and Brian Gulish, former co-host of Chairshot Reality, as well as myself, of course. Just get these out of the way. At Juicy Steen on Twitter, at Juicy Wrestling Closet on Instagram. You can also follow Brian at Brian Gulish on Twitter. Additionally, you can listen to the Juice Box on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and juicysteen.podbean.com. If you like what you hear and you'd like to listen to it more and get it dropped to your downloads each and every week, subscribe to that Apple Podcast feed. And if you do get a chance to review the show, rate and review it 5 stars on iTunes. That would really be appreciated and help the show moving forward. Now, without further ado, here's a deep dive over 2 hours featuring two huge Sting fans, myself and Brian Gulish, as we discuss the career of Sting, matches, moments, opponents, missed opportunities, and his legacy overall in the pro wrestling business as his career ends this Sunday at AEW Revolution in the Greensboro Coliseum as he and Darby Allin defend the tag team titles against the Young Bucks. Without further ado, here's Sting, a career retrospective featuring Brian Gulish right here on the Juice Box. And welcome to a very, very special edition of the Juice Box. Not only is this a special edition because of what I and my guest I will be introducing here are covering, but this guest is almost, I feel, like the last piece of the Chairshot Reality puzzle. I've had Justin LeBar on. I've had Josh Eisenberg on. I've had the Rev, Ron Hunt on. And now, with Sting, arguably my favorite wrestler and my next guest's favorite wrestler, retiring in a few days, who better to discuss Sting's career retrospective than the one, the only, Brian Gulish. How are you, man? It's been a long time.
Juice, my man, I'm ready to get a squeeze out of this one. I think we've got a lot to talk about here. I'm excited to talk about the Stinger.
Yeah. Can you believe that it's happening this weekend, man? I mean, watching it for how long, and you know, with wrestling, how many retirements did Terry Funk have, Ric Flair have? This honestly seems like Sting's going to go out, but he's going to go out on his own terms. Yeah,
as we were discussing before we jumped on here, you know, he's going to be 65 years old on March 20th. So yep. There's a certain shelf life for all of these guys, and not everyone's in the shape as The Rock over the age of 50, or even Jericho. And I'm not even sure how Jericho, but I know Jericho's in his 50s. So yeah, when you look at some of these guys and where they're at physically, I don't know where The Rock will be in 15 years, but I know that right now, at almost 65 years old, Sting's still doing it. T-shirt on or not, does not matter. But at some point, he's got to say enough's enough. And, you know, I'm glad, like you mentioned, he's going to do this on his own call, not the WWE's call, not TNA's call, not WCW's call, but it's his call.
Yeah, man, I could not be more thrilled that of all people, like I mentioned when I introduced you, I know you're a huge fan of Sting. There's photos I'll be posting to promote this thing of you as a kid as Sting. I was Sting as a kid, and my dad was Hollywood Hogan. And then you painted your face for Sting and went to Steeler games and Chairshot episodes, and you just so dedicated to the guy. And I just feel that of all the wrestlers throughout the years that have had the retirements, you know, like the Edge, you know, luckily enough to wrestle again, and Daniel Bryan wrestling again, Sting pretty much the same thing. And honestly, I couldn't tell you one person whether in the wrestling business, outside of the wrestling business, or a fan, even if you weren't really a WCW fan, because we'll get into that too about how I really don't know that many true WCW fans that watched it as it happened. But I don't know if anybody has said one negative thing about Sting in this profession. He seems like the most professional guy you could ever want in a company and on your team. And I think it's just a testament to his, the respect for him and his reliability over the years. And yeah, man, let's just kick this off. I really just want to dive in to just Sting, and for me, it might be a little different. I'm a little younger than you, but I know that you've been a fan since pretty much the beginning. So give me a little rundown of little Brian Gulish becoming a wrestling fan. Let's start with that because I would love to have you on for another episode for the SIP series where anybody that's been involved with wrestling, loves wrestling, had it in their life at one point or the other. I love getting to know the origin story, but I think we're going to touch on that a little bit here. So let me know when did you become a fan of wrestling and when did Sting become a part of that and how did it all come to be?
So I'm 41 and I remember the earliest days of watching wrestling. We had the little black box that scrambled that got the pay-per-views. And my actual first memory of wrestling is watching Ultimate Warrior. And it was probably around WrestleMania 4, WrestleMania 5, somewhere in there. Ironically, it was Warrior and not Sting, because at that time I didn't know that their backgrounds they started out together. And it just kind of evolved to where there was a unique perspective that, and you'll understand this coming from Pittsburgh, would always go to the WWF shows, right? So they would always be at the old Mellon Arena, Civic Arena, now PPG Paints Arena. New arena, but same location. But WCW, because of the contract Vince McMahon had with with the city of Pittsburgh and with the arena, WCW wasn't allowed to run shows at the old Civic Arena. They had to go to the AJ Palumbo Center, which is on Duquesne's campus.
Yes.
And I always remember wanting to go and see Sting and see WCW because for me, it was easiest to watch WCW at 6 o'clock on Saturday night. This is before Nitro. This is before the Monday Night Wars. It was recorded. You watched it. And it felt like the wrestling was actually in your living room because it was a small studio setting. But back to my point, I was never able to actually go watch WCW. We went to every WWE or WWF event in Pittsburgh, but never went to a WCW event. And we'll talk about this in a little bit. The first time I actually saw Sting in person wrestle was at WrestleMania 31, which is hard to believe that it took that long for me to see him in person. But those are my earliest days. I recall the Warrior. I recall probably being 6 years old, 5, 6 years old. And I recall having a Sting poster on my wall. And I don't know how I got it, if my mom got it for me or how it was ordered, but those are my early memories of wrestling. But for some reason, even though WWF was always there to see in Pittsburgh, I just took the WCW and I always took the Sting. And I don't know if it was the neon colors, if it was just the out of this world superhero persona that he was, just something about him and WCW stood out to me. And that's what I attached to.
Wow. Yeah, man. I really wish I could put it in a better way than that, but I'm going to struggle to. First, you mentioned the little scrambled box for pay-per-views. My family was, lower middle class. So even if we were to buy a pay-per-view, it might be 1 or 2 a year. But other than that, we had the scramble thing and I would listen and find any way to get access to wrestling. I had PWIs. I had, less than, ideal situation to figure out what wrestling was on. But I always knew WCW was the show I would always end up watching. Now looking back on it, our family would, like my dad would tape Raw and we'd watch Nitro live. My dad would watch, back when he was growing up, he'd watch Georgia Championship Wrestling and NWA. And he would also, Saturday night, 6:05, watching WCW. And I don't recall this memory, of course. I was only 3, but I was lucky enough. My parents, myself, and my aunt, we went to Wheeling, West Virginia for the June 10th, 1996 Nitro, where Kevin Nash famously, you know, reappeared as himself with the adjective play. But
Yeah.
so looking back on that's pretty cool. But there's a photo that my mom took, I think from that event, or maybe it was another event in Wheeling, where Sting points right at her because she had a Sting-sational poster that she made with glitter. And I think she might still have that. But outside of that, and this is another thing I always find more interesting the older I get, and especially because you grew up a little older than me, so you definitely I feel like can feel this on the opposite end. Probably 98% of other fans. I grew up with Hulk Hogan as a heel, as a bad guy. I did it backwards. I grew up seeing Sting, and you put it so perfectly. Like it's a superhero energy, but for some reason it's so like believable. Like he wasn't like trying to be a superhero. He was just a superhero. Like he was bigger than just a regular wrestler. Like you knew what you were getting with Sting. He would high fly all over the place. He would, do anything it took to win a match. But he would also never give up. He would get just beat down and beat down. And we'll talk about some of those matches. I'm specifically referring to like Vader and the matches he had where he could get destroyed. But you always knew Sting is going to put up a fight that maybe could even topple a guy like Vader. So growing up as Hogan as the heel, Sting as the Crow, I kind of vaguely remember him with as the Surfer Sting, but I kind of remember the Crow even more, where he's the anti-hero instead of just a superhero, which was another genius thing. And we'll get to Starrcade '97, of course, but just an aura, I think the kids say these days about Sting that really drew me as a young fan to him. Do you remember maybe the first match you ever got to see of Sting? Like whether it was looking back on it or, just whenever you had the, an access to a VHS tape or something. Do you recall maybe a first match you saw of Sting?
Oh, I vividly remember the Great American Bash in 1990 when he beat Flair.
Oh yeah.
That was at the time to me like Christmas because again, going back through the memories, thinking through like 88, 89, I remember some things when he was involved with the Horsemen and when he jumped off, when he was pulled off the cage and blew his knee out, like little things like that. I recall leading up to that point to where he faced Flair. Like I don't remember watching the 88 Clash. I obviously have watched it several times. And we're talking about the 45-minute draw.
Oh
I
yeah.
remember seeing that because I've watched that back several times. But my first actual match I recall is when he beat Flair for the title. And, one of the things that I recall to this day from that match, and it's a common theme throughout Sting's career. There's a lot of common themes that I've noticed throughout his career. But he won with a small package. And he didn't win with the Scorpion Deathlock. He hit a Stinger Splash. He had Ric Flair in the Scorpion Deathlock, but he rolled him up, and to me that devalued that win a little bit. Yes, it was a world championship win, but the fact that he did it with a small package or an inside cradle or a schoolboy or whatever you want to call it, that's how he won that match. And if you kind of look through all the big wins in Sting's career, even wins versus Vader, wins versus Cactus Jack, he never really won with the Scorpion Deathlock. It was always a splash off the top rope, or
Yep.
He beat Cactus Jack with a clothesline off the top rope out on the entranceway. He would win with those moves. He beat Ming with a jumping DDT in 1995 for the U.S. title. Like he never really won a marquee match with the Scorpion Deathlock. Now we'll talk about Starrcade '97, and that whole finish was just wacky. But even in that moment, yes, he did win with the Scorpion Deathlock, but it was after everything happened. So Great American Bash is the first match I recall actually Sting and being super hyped for, because I was 7 years old at the time. But I always remember just the way that match finished, and I looked throughout his entire career, and there was just something about the way that Sting was winning these big matches that it just, for me, it left a lot to be desired.
Which is pretty interesting, I have to say, to hear. Although I never really looked at it like that, but you are right. Those matches that he did win, I can recall Slamboree '94 against Vader. He dive off the top rope.
There was, I think it was, I don't know if it was Great American Bash. No, it was Super Brawl. He beat Vader at Super Brawl, the power slam off the top rope. So he caught Vader and slammed
match.
There was never, he never beat. And granted, looking at the booking mentality at the time, you're not gonna want Sting to beat a 400-pound man with a Scorpion Deathlock. You're not, but there's
True.
just do you want to show Flair looking weak to the Scorpion Deathlock? I felt like they always tried to keep those heels looking strong against Sting. So normally it's the heels that would win with some kind of screwy finish.
Right.
But in this case, it's your face who Stinger Splash Scorpion Deathlock to every single jobber that he faced. But when it came to the big matches on the pay-per-views or the Clash of Champions, very few times did he actually beat somebody. He beat Flair on Nitro with the Scorpion Deathlock, but he would never beat actual big name opponents in title matches with that move.
And another thing that's a great point, I think, to add to that is, when did the tap out really start? Because to me, it never really happened in WCW, at least until we get to that finish, the screwy finish at Starrcade. But even then, Hogan never, it was never tapping out wasn't like a thing like it as huge as it is now with the advent of MMA and tapping out just ending the match, where that's every single submission. That's how they end now, other than a pass out. So to me, if it was just a regular match on Saturday night against Joe Schmo or Randy Hogan, then you might not get a splash or something. You're going to get his main, Scorpion Deathlock, and that's it. It's over. And that's an easy way to get that finish strong. And, if he puts it on you, it's going to be trouble. But he almost never seemed to get it. You know what it seems like? It's almost like the Ric Flair top rope thing, where he has the Scorpion Deathlock, but when does he actually win with it? When Flair won the world title with the top rope heads, what was it? I think it was like the head scissor off the top rope, or he did like the into the victory roll. But then he never had hit that move ever again until like Mania 24 against Shawn.
Well, and talking about Mania, if you look at Bret Hart and how their careers paralleled, Bret Hart, when you switch the channel to WWF, he's got an identical finisher that he would always beat opponents with
every single time.
Move.
Great point.
There was no, Bret Hart would roll somebody up once in a blue moon in a very technical match with a Mr. Perfect or someone like that. But Bret Hart is always defeating the big name opponents with the Scorpion Deathlock or with the sharpshooter. And Sting's version, again, it just seemed like that always devalued things. And, we'll talk about it. I just, again, even leading up to the WrestleMania 31 match, it always just seemed like Sting, and I wasn't as surprised as you may think I'll be when we talk about WrestleMania 31 and that outcome.
Okay.
I wrote down a couple things here, and one of them was, a lot to be desired in his career, but also I said always seemed to be a victim of bad booking, but he always overcame it. There was always some type, they talk about the dusty finish.
Yeah.
There's finishes that could be dusty finishes or not. It's just for some reason, whether I don't care who was booking the territory, whether it was NWA, Crockett, whether it was WCW, I felt like there was just, I don't know. There was just something there that makes you go, when you think about the way Sting was booked, even in his wins.
And the best part, and that's what like the overarching, I think, point of this episode and his career and just Sting in general is no matter what you did to this guy, he was always coming back. He was always reliable. He would always wrestle the next night. He'd always be able to have another match with someone and it never fazed him. It never, you might, think that it did, or you hear stories of, oh, like I keep going back to Starrcade 97 of like, he didn't look ready for this match. He was in another place, but eventually he kind of came back around and still did great in 98 and had a run in 99. And like even a huge thing like that event in Starrcade, and the controversy and just how it went, and yet he still ended up having 4 more years of wrestling for WCW. And I felt like even as fans, where you want to be like, damn, that really, messed up his career. It's a tarnish or whatever. It never phased him. He always was just there the next week, always willing to be a team player. And I think the respect that he garnered from that, especially as I would wager, and this might be a bold statement, but I think it's true. Sting is pretty much the only guy to have such a huge, lengthy career and it never be hinged with WWE. Like, WWE is a footnote in Sting's career. He did everything else in WCW and in TNA, and he's done so much in AEW that I'm so thankful that he's getting to do, including this farewell, this retirement. You mentioned Clash of the Champions 1, 45-minute draw, went head-to-head with WrestleMania 4, Greensboro Coliseum, and how fitting Greensboro Coliseum again in his final match with him and Darby Allin versus the Young Bucks. How poetic is that, Brian?
It's timely, I think, given the fact that the resources and the position of a Tony Khan to where he can pull something like that off. Obviously, this has been planned for a while. I'm sure when Sting sat down with Tony and they were trying to figure out how this would end, Tony probably brought the idea up to Sting. Sting probably didn't even think about it being in Greensboro.
Yeah.
But I think when you look back at this next week and they're going to really share a lot of memories. I know they want to get a lot of these old fellow wrestlers that Sting grew up with. I've heard about MASH not being able to go because of his Legends contract, but I think you're going to see some faces from Sting's past that'll be there to share memories. That it's going to be a nostalgia moment. But again, to your point, like giving him the opportunity to go out on his terms, I think they're going to set something special up. I've said it from the start. I think that, Ric Flair, when he came in and he wanted to be there for the final ride as a friend to Sting, and I said there's only one way that Sting goes out, and that's getting screwed by Ric Flair. And I don't think there's a point to this where we're talking about Clash of Champions.
Absolutely.
45-minute draw. Ric Flair put Sting on the map. Sting does not forget his roots. Sting does not forget where he came from. If you hear a lot of his interviews, he talks about how, everything from the UWF to, when he came up to WCW and NWA initially, like a lot of the people that helped him out. And if there's anybody that helped him out more than anyone, obviously it was Ric Flair. So I still think Nature Boy is going to play a part in this match, and I don't think it's going to be on Sting's side. And if he were to cost Sting the match, I'd be fine with it because it's just kind of full circle Sting's career.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that at the end of this, where we'll kind of give our thoughts, our final predictions on the final fatal encounter for Sting. But let's just kind of casually go through some of his best moments, his biggest matches throughout his career. And if you find one, maybe that I glossed over, go right ahead. We already mentioned Clash of the Champions 1. Great American Bash 90, against Flair, of course. Some other Flair matches. I guess we can do it like that. Let's kind of go, instead of in order of time, let's kind of go through each person that he wrestled against. So Flair, arguably, let's get to that. You brought up how he definitely might screw over Sting here in his final match. But outside of Clash 1 and Great American Bash, how about Starrcade 90? Where the Black Scorpion angle was, we just recently lost Ole Anderson, who voiced the Black Scorpion and, fun fact, the Shockmaster. But that was an interesting time. And Starrcade 90, even though I was born after the event, was one of the first shows I ever got to see because my dad, I believe, taped it and it was on a mislabeled tape at my grandma's house. And I watched it and I was like, whoa, what the hell is this? And Sting Black Scorpion, it was a little hokey, but RoboCop was involved earlier that year, so it couldn't be hokier than that. Did you like the Black Scorpion thing, or looking back on it, was it kind of weird, or what do you think?
It was weird. And
Yeah.
again, if you are a casual fan, you're not going to realize there's going to be the suspense and the intrigue. And for even only being 7, 8 years old at the time, all you have to look at is the mannerisms of the person underneath the mask, underneath the all black outfit. You knew it was Ric Flair.
Oh yeah.
So again, that kind of took away from it. Did they need to run that angle? I don't think so. But again,
No.
I feel like they wanted to continue the two of them working together. And the way to do that was to create this third party, being the Black Scorpion, being obviously Ric Flair under the mask. But I think they could have just continued to play out their feud without having this tied in. Again, it's creative, it's kayfabe, it's keeping it all, suspense, and I get that. But looking back on it and understanding the way angles play out and how storyboarding is done now, I feel like they probably could have went without it.
Yeah, and as I recall, I believe that they weren't sure how to end the angle. Like they didn't know who actually to reveal, so like, Flair's wrestled Sting, let's do Flair. So I guess it worked.
But if you go back, right, and I know we're going by opponent here,
yeah.
But even a few months earlier, I believe it was 1990 when Sting fought Sid Vicious, and that's when Sting went into the crowd and Barry Windham comes in dressed as Sting, and that whole angle too. So how did we get from that? And then 2 or 3 months later, we've got the Black Scorpion. It was very disconnected.
That was 2 months earlier at Havoc. Yeah, isn't that crazy? But WCW, had a love for the bizarre and really didn't find a lot of their footing until much later on. So it's understandable how they could have a couple of those moments happen within a 3 month span. But so those moments with Flair, Flair kind of comes back to WCW in '93. Late in '93, he gets to tag. Sting and Flair get to tag on a Clash of the Champions, which is a fun little interaction. But by June of '94, Hogan's in. And Flair and Sting have another great match at the Clash of the Champions for the International World Title. It was like a unification bout. And of course, Flair wins. Flair gets the match against Hogan at Bash of the Beach, and the rest they say is history. But would you have liked to have seen Sting against Hogan in '94? Because personally, and I thought that, I'm pretty sure they've discussed this on some other podcasts, but the rumor was that Sting Hogan was absolutely thought about for Starrcade 94, and instead we got the Butcher.
Well, I think that back then, before Vince McMahon claimed that there were no heels and no faces in wrestling, that are you really going to have a face versus a face, two fan favorites, two of the most popular wrestlers in the world at that time go up against each other? And I think that WCW always wanted to have the match that WWF did not have with Flair and Hogan, and they saw the opportunity. So I think it was more a testament to WCW wanting to have Flair and Hogan because WWE dropped the ball on that one at not having that at a WrestleMania.
Yeah.
So that was just Sting at the wrong place at the wrong time. But again, Sting never complained, right? I remember a photo shoot that they had. It was Sting, it was Hogan, it was Randy Savage, right? It was all the good guys together. And even in that light, when you look at Sting and he's sitting next to Savage and Hogan, who, came from New York and they were the big names in the mainstream, that's who people saw as the faces of that company. And that was at that point when Sting did start to take that step backwards. But I think it kind of foreshadowed everything that was to come in 96 and 97 because it built up over time. And that was also when we started to see Sting slowly start to grow his hair out, right? Transition Sting, going from Surfer Sting to Crow Sting, which we can talk about that too. Like, I honestly, one of my favorite Sting characters was that character that was in between, the transition character where was still wearing the vibrant colors, but he had the dark hair. He had the highlights that were getting a little bit darker. And for everyone saying that, and we'll just jump to this right now.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, Bischoff had the plan for the NWO and Sting was going to be the savior for WCW. I felt like that Sting was already starting to transition his character long before there was any thought of him being the Crow character. So where was that? Unless Bischoff and WCW had the idea for the Crow character in 1994, 1995, it was interesting to see how if you go and look back at when that hair started to grow out, it was long before there was any thought to having the NWO Sting angle.
Yeah, and that's also interesting because Hogan in late '95, towards Halloween Havoc, had his mustache shaved off and turned to the quote dark side, black headband, black trunks, and fought the Giant at Havoc '95. No, of course he wasn't a heel, but I can't help but look at that and say, you know, this is a little bit interesting that they kind of tried something, a little bit of a toe dipped in the water of a heel turn. And then lo and behold, a couple months later, you know, it's the biggest angle in the history of the company. And it also, interestingly enough, and this is not a Hulk Hogan episode, but Uncensored 96, the team, and as ridiculous as this match was, the 2-on-8 between Savage and Hogan and those 8 guys in the massive cage, it was the alliance to end Hulkamania. And when you think about it, after that show, Hulk Hogan, even though they won, he was not seen again until Bash at the Beach 96. So that alliance did end Hulkamania, which is crazy in retrospect.
Yeah, but, it was.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just feel like, you know, there's just so much to be desired in his career. And none of that was his decision. It was all decisions that were made to where if you needed a company guy, he was your company guy because there was no ego. He left that at the door. And we all know, maybe we don't all know, but we've heard that he had some demons in his past and he had some issues at the height of his run there when he was Crow Sting. But I just feel like this is the one guy who, you know, they say sometimes nice guys finish last. And I feel like maybe if he would have protected his interests a little bit better and did a little more lobbying and politicking for himself, not to the degree of a Hulk Hogan, but I feel like he could have looked a little bit stronger throughout his career.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with that, but I also think that, you know, that fact about Sting is what is endearing about him, and that's why, you know, he's being so celebrated now. There's not any part of him, his career, where people felt, you know, oh man, Sting's taking advantage of this situation. He put this guy down and he never put this guy over. Like, he was always just willing to do whatever and always be the team player, whether it was good or bad for his own career, be that as it may. Let's close out the Flair portion here real quick. 95, as I mentioned, you know, Halloween Havoc, this is alluding to what could happen this Sunday. He thought he was going to tag with Ric Flair. Ric Flair comes out, turns heel on him again. And we get one of my favorite matches. I'm going to put it in my top 5 Sting matches. World War III 95, Sting versus Ric Flair. They also, of course, had the match on the first Nitro, which is fantastic in that year. But World War III 95, if you're not a WCW fan, traditionally, you know, multiple rings in an arena are kind of foreign to you unless you're watching War Games now. But even then, with War Games, 2 rings, you'd have a couple guys go back and forth throughout the rings before the War Games matches because the rings had to be there. For World War III, there were 3 rings, 60 guys, but those 3 rings were there all night. And Sting and Flair had a match, and Flair would, you know, powder to the outside, get into another ring. The spotlights would switch all the way to the next ring, and Sting would follow him. And it's just an amazing dynamic, and it's something that's just unique. And I think it's the Sting Flair match. I'm gonna, you know, choose, you know, my opinion at least, for one of my favorite matches between the two. And of course, the last Nitro, where you said Sting wrestling in a shirt and he looks fine and it doesn't affect him. That match, the last Nitro, Ric Flair had a shirt on. He did not feel comfortable. And of course, since then, that kind of changed. But it's just funny how, you could have seen Ric Flair have his last match then, the last Nitro. He doesn't feel himself. You don't know what's going to happen with WCW after that. Of course, he kept wrestling, but Sting now is going to close out his career. He's probably going to wear a shirt. So it's funny how things go. Out of those matches, do you have a favorite Flair Sting match in particular, or is it just Clash 1 or Great American Bash for you?
I mean, the one that stands out to me, obviously, is the Great American Bash because he won the title. That was like, okay, Clash may have put him on the map. Great American Bash is what kind of verified that he was the top guy. He was the guy that was going to eventually supplant Ric Flair as the face, not the face, but the standard bearer for WCW, for NWA. I loved the last Nitro match. I can recite Sting's promo that he made with all the bats floating around him.
Love that.
It's just when the company's shutting its doors, and that's kind of the coup de grace for them. Let's get in the ring one more time. Let's have a battle. Love the fact that Baby Nate was the referee for that one. It kind of just it pulled it all together and really was the perfect send off for WCW. For as many issues as WCW had in the 18 months leading up to that, that was at least a one good memory to have WCW end on.
I agree. I love that too. And like you said, like the company's about to be done. We don't know who is going to take over, where we're going, our contract situation. And they're like, look, Sting and Flair works. Let's send them out there. And they couldn't have been more professional. And I thought had a great send off for the company, as it were. Let's tackle a couple more guys that feuded with Sting. Not as in depth. I want to get more in depth like Vader and then Luger before we talk about TNA, AEW, and close this thing out. But, Sid, Havoc 90 we mentioned. Also Halloween Havoc 93 I thought was kind of an underrated match between the two. I always felt that Sid, critical as people might want to be of, he doesn't want to wrestle these dates or softball season. I always felt that he was a pretty strong overall character, babyface or heel. And I liked his couple interactions with Sting. The Havoc 90 one where the switch is made. I love that kind of stuff. It's hokey, but hey, it's Halloween Havoc. You never know what's going to happen. What are your thoughts on Sid and how he kind of fits in the little Sting career thing here?
So I think what helps Sid out in WCW was his brief run in WWE and his feud with Hogan and the matches he had on the quote unquote big stage. And then he comes back to WCW and has that additional substance that maybe he didn't have the first time around. Because I remember him obviously in the Horsemen in the late 80s and he was larger than life. But, there's certain things I remember about some of the matches and some of the run-ins and some of the things that happened. But then when he came back, it was like, okay, Sting's beating this guy, or Sting is at least facing off against this 7-foot monster who was just fighting the top guys in WWF for a couple years. So I wouldn't say they were Sting's best matches or his best feuds, but when you look at Sting being against all odds, facing the monsters, the giants, whether it was Sid or whether it was Vader, I think it gave that. Again, you create that superhuman superhero personality that if anybody can overcome these characters, it's Sting. And I look at the Sting character back then versus if the Sting Surfer character was now, and there aren't really characters now. It's just the personalities of the individual. I think that what helped Sting establish himself was the fact that he wasn't Steve Borden. It was the fact that he was the super stinger. He had the face paint, and whenever he faced a big name like a Vader, like a Sid, like those guys, he was the one that you looked up to, like you were watching the Incredible Hulk or Spider-Man or Superman or Batman on television during cartoons. So I think it helped him a lot, and to have Sid play a pivotal part in that, I think again made Sting look even stronger.
Yeah, Sid was definitely that. Sting is a larger than life character, but Sid was literally larger than life at, stature wise. And I want to say the 93 Havoc match was to find out who the franchise of WCW was. Like, it was an interesting, not physical title, but title placed on the match. So I like the interactions as well. Mick Foley, Cactus Jack. I mean, the two matches that come to mind to me, the Beach Blast 92 match, which, man, looking back on it, like, Mick Foley really, God, he got Sting at Sting's like height of his powers in a WCW match, which I think is just fantastic. Right before, like, a couple years before Mick Foley really became a huge star, as Mankind, on a grander scale. But I am partial. There's a match. I don't know. It might be on a Cactus Jack DVD. It might be on a Sting WWE release. But there is a Submit or Surrender match between the two on WCW Power Hour, where Sting put. I think he puts Cactus in a garbage can, like a plastic garbage can, or uses one on him, and it's just a wild, random, like, TV, not even Saturday night match between the two. I thought Foley brought the best out of Sting and vice versa. They're just kind of crazy. Sting is not as hardcore as Foley, but definitely as wild and charismatic as each other. So what are your thoughts on Cactus Jack's interactions with Sting over the years? And we can kind of touch on as each person we get through, because Flair will be at this show at Revolution. I doubt Sid will be there. Maybe Mick Foley could be at Revolution, but what are your thoughts on Sting and Cactus Jack throughout the years?
So we talked earlier about Sting being in good enough physical condition at almost 65 years old to continue to do what he's doing. And he's taking risks now, jumping off balconies and whatnot. But if you look back from 1991 to 1993, 94, some of these characters that he faced, Vader, Cactus Jack, Jake Roberts, Rick Rude, but particularly Vader and Cactus Jack, Sting took some very, very tough bumps in a lot of those matches. And especially the one with Cactus, when we're doing, sunset flips and suplexes on the concrete or even on the rampway. There are a lot of things that were done that, Sting risked a lot. And I feel like, if anything, some of the physicality of the matches against Cactus Jack, and I think about some of the interactions. I forget what it was when, what was it, with Abdul the Butcher and
yes,
the Thunderdome? Was it Thunderdome?
No,
it wasn't Thunderdome.
You're thinking of the Chamber of Horrors.
Yeah, the Chamber of Horrors.
Yeah.
And again, another big, larger than life character that felt like Sting was always fighting these horror movies in his matches. But yeah, that's kind of what Cactus Jack was, because you saw how tough he was and rough he was against Sting. And as a kid, you're wincing, you're probably crying at times because your superhero is being beat down in a very vicious way that you're not used to. And I think it just added to the aura of the superhero character.
Yeah, the crazy bumps that those guys would take in those matches, let alone, Sting being able to continue until now. Foley, of course, he's, recently he said he would like to do one more match, but his body's broken down over the years. It's just that's another factor in all of this. I mean, Ric Flair, even so that he, retired in 2022, he was done wrestling well before that. Sid has been done wrestling for a while. The next couple of guys we'll be discussing, including Rick Rude, has since passed. Vader has since passed. Lex Luger is confined to a wheelchair. The fact that Sting has interacted with all these guys, about to be 65 later in March, is such a testament to, just his, training, his ability to, I guess, stay as safe as he could in the ring, or whatever his regimen is, that he's still around. I mean, it's just wild to see. Let's get into the Lex Luger of it all. Super Brawl 2, they had a match. They, as Luger got sent out of WCW, so Luger put his friend over. They opened up a gym, I know, in Atlanta, so they've been closed for a very long time. They closed out Battle Bowl in 91, which set up Super Brawl 2. I know you I believe, watched Battle Bowl, a couple months ago, which I love Battle Bowl, so we're going to spend a whole episode on that. They also tagged once Luger came back to to WCW in '96, and that was kind of that Sting almost, that medium, like I'm a face, but I'm kind of just like over it all, and I want to trust Lex Luger, but I shouldn't. I didn't trust him before, and then we got the great like Lex Luger's agenda storyline, which is one of my favorites from that time frame where they're tag champs. Sting is the honest, genuine babyface, and Lex Luger is a face, but he's not as genuine. When Sting is giving high fives to fans on the left side and not looking at Luger, Luger is ignoring them and posing. And then when Sting looks over at Luger, Luger's all thrilled and has a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and it's so phony. And I just love that dynamic. Luger, I remember another promo, they got interrupted by the Road Warriors, I think at a Clash of the Champions. And Sting's like, look, let's wrestle the Road Warriors. Let's do it. Let's have this match. And Luger's like, look, there's so many other teams that are ahead of you, like State Patrol. And he just rattled off like these jobber tag teams. And Sting's like, what? What are you talking about? Let's face them. So Luger and Sting, and they also wrestled at Starrcade '99 well after the fact. But these two guys really tied together their careers. I really would love to see Lex Luger at Revolution, but if he wants to go to the Hall of Fame in WWE, I don't know if that's possible. What are your thoughts of the Lex Luger interactions with Sting over the years? I mean, he's kind of best friends with Sting, right?
Well, again, I think that without Ric Flair, there's no Sting. I think without Lex Luger, there's no Sting. And if you want to talk about maybe an overlooked dynamic or variable in his career, it's Lex Luger. And everything you said about when they tagged up and Rick was when Luger was playing that kind of middle game, hey, I'm going to be your face partner, but I'm also going to do this heel tendencies. I'm going to be a coward in some ways. But it all goes back to, again, late 80s when Luger was in the Horsemen, or Luger and Sting in the early 90s had all their battles. If you didn't know that they had a relationship and they were very close outside of the ring, I think that helped their synergies inside the ring. And I think it only added to that dynamic. I think that they could have done a lot more with Sting and Lex Luger. But it wasn't meant to be, because similar to Flair, Lex Luger left. He went to WWE. He had his run. He was supposed to be the next Hogan when Hogan left and went to WCW. And when Luger showed up at the first Nitro, talk about, when we're talking about Sting versus Ric Flair, and you've got Luger there as well, and Hogan shows up, and it's like there was so much opportunity there.
Yeah.
And the one thing I will say that Lex Luger did better than Sting in his career was, and this always baffled me, but long before Sting defeated Hollywood Hogan at Starrcade, Lex Luger had the clean victory against Hulk Hogan in the summer of 1997. And for me, that was just like, what the hell just happened? This is supposed to be Sting's feud, Sting's moment. Who booked this? But again, it was just, I think Luger had everything needed to be the top guy. And for one reason or another, he couldn't get there. But when you paired him with Sting, again, it was one of those things, maybe Luger couldn't get out of his own way. But when he was with Sting, Sting kind of kept him on the right track. So I think that they were really supportive of each other. And I think that it was just such an interesting dynamic that I think we could have saw a lot more out of that.
I think so too. And a point that you made, and it just made me realize again, like you said, and Luger, like Flair, went to the WWE, could have had a moment, and like he had a run, but like it wasn't as good, and then he came back. Meanwhile, Sting just stayed in WCW, plugged along, won titles. Like, just the loyalty is endearing, whether you think it's foolish or not, or you think it kind of hurt his career long term, or he never had this moment or that moment. But the moments he did have, because he was so loyal and did things kind of his way, but to help the team that he was on, I think are admirable. Another match, though, him and Luger, Sting and Luger versus the Steiners, Super Brawl 1. Arguably one of the best tag matches of all time. If you have not seen it, you should go out of your way to watch it. It's just a crazy
with a wacky finish.
Oh, wow! Oh my God! I know. Well,
Again,
they had to set up another match. You're right.
It made no sense to me. I remember watching that, and Nikita comes down with the chain. He goes after Luger. He had Sting, and the Steiners come in because they're friends, right? It's a face versus face tag team match.
Yeah.
But you look at some of the spots.
Super match too.
You look at some of the spots in that match when Sting went over the top rope.
Yeah, out of nowhere. Nobody was doing that, Brian. Nobody was doing that in 1991, and Sting just goes, you know what? And it didn't even. He just cleared the ropes to the floor.
Yeah, he was a athlete beyond an athlete. It was amazing. And again, this is with his track record of some of his injuries, particularly the patella tendon he blew out. So for him to be able to do those things with being a former bodybuilder and having the physique that he had back in the mid 80s, right? He wasn't the most agile person in the world when he started wrestling. He kind of leaned into that body, having that base of the incredible muscle that he had. But for someone that take that strength and that physical look and then also have the agility to do what he did was fantastic. But I agree with you. I think that match, that's to me one of the top, and I'm going to combine that with Sting's best matches of all time. I felt like that was such a great match. But again, another wacky finish. Why couldn't we just get, and I know we have to set up feuds for the future, but they could have done that in some other way than end a great match like that with a run-in from Nikita.
Yeah, you could have shot an angle afterwards. So the dive to the outside sticks out to me, and then I just recall, like, I don't know, Scott Steiner gets tagged in and immediately double underhooks. Whether it's Sting or Luger, I can't recall, but it just double underhooks them like they're nothing. And these are all heavyweights, and just like double underhook power bombs them. And the energy is just insane in that match. Go ahead.
I'd love to look back, and I know it wouldn't be Luger,
right?
But I'm pretty sure he gives Sting a Frankensteiner in that match.
Oh, I'm sure he does. And God, that was the I mean, they were all dangerous, but he's hitting them, and you better be flipping and know how to sell that move, or else you're taking one off the dome straight to the mat. But oh my God, I'm gonna have to watch that match after we record here. Couple more here. Rick Rude, he had some very interesting interactions with Sting. The three I chose here. Clash 17, another tape that I randomly stumbled into, and I love this event. I've seen it like hundreds of times because it was like one of the only tapes I had access to. This is no, WWE Network or Peacock, and it's not a pay-per-view, so it wasn't a release. I would always watch this show, but they do the mystery box angle, and Lex Luger, comes out of the box even though Medusa was there to entice him. Injures his knee. They send Sting away to the hospital. Rick Rude's supposed to go against Sting. Sting's going to defend the U.S. title. And all night, they're building this up. It's great for TV. Eric Bischoff's calling from the hospital saying, I don't know, he might make it. They get to the match, and they're like, if he doesn't get here within, by the count of 10, and he's outside the building, and people are letting him in, and he has a great match with Rick Rude. And great storytelling for a non-pay-per-view. They clashed again at Spring Stampede 94, and unfortunately, that was the last pay-per-view match Rude ever had, because in Japan, those two hooked up again, and Sting hit Rude with a dive to the outside, something he's done 1,000 times. We brought it up, but the elevated nature of the Japanese ring at the time led a little bit of like a step where Sting landed on Rude, and Rude's lower back clipped that, almost like the Shawn Michaels casket match injury. And Rick Rude never wrestled again. He was never the same. And that's unfortunate that Sting was a part of that. But Rude and Sting, Rude, great body. Sting, great, valiant, plucky baby face. I mean, these two kind of were meant as like perfect adversaries for each other. What stands out to you with Rick Rude and Sting?
The fact that Sting returned from the hospital with half a pant leg on and his knee wrapped up. I'll always remember that. For some reason, those pink tights.
Pink tights, yes.
And he had it cut off. And I remember when he got back, and that's one of the matches I do remember watching live. And I actually think that initially the way they played that out, he didn't know which door he was supposed to go into from the outside, because he went to a door and someone had to say, no, you got to go this way. And he's hobbling in to barely beat the 10 count to get in the ring. But if you look at where some of the, think of Paul Heyman, right? Paulie Dangerously at that time. It's just amazing to think that where he's at now with Roman Reigns, he was back then in main event angles like this with the Dangerous Alliance, which was incredible. And there's just something about Rick Rude's arrogance, his ego, right? That character that he played. Again, perfect adversary for Sting. And, I think back to the Rick Rude that was in World Wrestling Federation and the main event matches he had, the Intercontinental title runs, the bouts with Jake Roberts. I think about some of these characters, these opponents that Sting fought in WCW. And at one time or another, they were all big, big stars at WWF. Jake Roberts, Rick Rude. And then even after the fact, right? Hogan comes up from WWF, Savage. It's just, you talk about who came and who went from WCW to WWE back and forth, but you're talking about guys who made a name for themselves at the big company and came to WCW, and Sting's having great matches with them. And if you're just a traditional WCW fan, you never watched WWF, you wouldn't know about it. But if you watch both and you saw a Rick Rude come in, or you saw a Jake Roberts come in, and you see Sting having matches against these guys that were top stars up there, I think that further validated Sting's credibility. But again, there were always some type of asterisks, for lack of a better term, that was attached to these matches.
And I went into this, and this has been great so far. I'm not discounting what we've all been discussing with Sting here, but you made me really think deeper. God, did he ever, how many clean finishes did he have? Did he ever get something, where he was put over the right way, and it wasn't a goofy angle or a fluke finish or restart the match? Finally, some matches that did have clarity: Sting and Vader. This is the one I've been wanting to talk about since the beginning. Great American Bash 92, Super Brawl 3 in a strap match, Beach Blast 93, Sid and Vader versus Bulldog and Sting, and Slamboree 94 for the International World Title in Philly, where WrestleMania will be 30 years from that event. But, David and Goliath gets thrown around a lot, and it's tough for me to kind of directly correlate David and Goliath with Sting and Vader, because they're, Sting's pretty tall and a big guy overall, but compared to Big Van Vader, and I can recall even more so because I was, kid growing up, I had the San Francisco toy makers, rubber LJN kind of WCW guys. I had the Vader, which was 1,000 pounds, it would break every ring you had, and I had the Sting, and those two would have battles, and they had battles that are legendary in real life. Personally, I think probably the Super Brawl 3 match, the strap match, is their best match. I will choose Slamboree 94 as my personal favorite match because Sting goes into that night. They give him the title. They say, look, Rick Rude could not have this match against Vader because of that injury suffered with Sting. And it pisses me off because Rick Rude was turning face to face Vader, which we never saw before. We've never seen Rick Rude as a babyface, and he was going to face Vader there, and he got injured. So Sting is like, well, I don't want to just be handed this title. I want to wrestle it for it. And so he's, I guess you could call him naive or stupid for it, but he's like, I'm going to wrestle Vader for this title instead of having it handed to me. And he got his ass handed to him, but he won. These are incredible matches. I can't say enough about them. What are your favorite memories with Vader and Sting?
Well, the strap match, that was definitely one that stands out to me. The Slamboree match, obviously, because he actually won. But if you look at the two characters, there's not too many people that could keep up with Vader. And Vader, it's known, was a stiff worker. Even on their table for three on WWE Network, right? Sting and Vader were talking about just like how tough those clubs that Vader threw were. Vader didn't sugarcoat anything, and
No.
Sting probably preferred it that way because it made it even look more real. That hey, you've got this 450-pound beast, the mastodon, that he has his way with everybody. If you look at Vader's opponents in WCW, Sting's really the only one that could power slam him, that could suplex him, that could superplex him off the top rope. Like, there's some things there that stand out in those matches that, again, aside from Flair, I've always loved the rivalry that Sting had with Vader. There is one, though, that I think we're leaving off, and I'll let you think if you can think about it, but I have three. My favorite three Sting opponents were Flair, Vader, and one other individual. So I'll leave that to you to say, do you know who that other individual is?
Okay, so it's not Jake Roberts, is it?
Because we've been bringing him up. We've not mentioned it yet. We've mentioned
someone I haven't mentioned, and it was in WCW.
Yes.
Oh, is it DDP?
No, and I believe you're going to see him at Revolution.
At Revolution, so he is still alive. He's still wrestling. Bret Hart?
Give you one more chance.
This is brutal.
We got a 20-minute time limit here, Juice.
Yeah, I know. Oh goodness. Can you give me a hint? Can you give me something that's not giving it away? I know this is bad. I'm the host, but I'm losing it. I got all these other notes on everybody else.
His most famous move is similar to something Shinsuke Nakamura does.
Why am I losing? Is it? You talking about Meg?
Talking about the Great Muta.
Oh, okay, yeah. I almost brought him up earlier, but they had a couple of interactions. I know Starrcade '89, among others, but go right ahead. Let's hear some Muta stuff.
Well, no, I just felt like Sting and Muta, again, from pure athletic standpoint, they put on some classics in the ring. Again, I always felt like Muta being the heel with the mist and Sting being the baby face with the face paint. I talk about matches they have over in Japan as well. If you go back and look at some of those battles that they had, it was, again, almost like it was so much larger than life, the two of them getting together. I just felt like, there weren't many title matches, if any, that I can recall, but it was something when they got in the ring and both had their face painted, and Muta has his incredible repertoire of athletic moves that he did, the flips into the corner with the big elbows, and the way that Muta would do some of his moves with just the precise, like, just that little extra oomph he had on them. It just seemed like this is another guy that always had Sting's number, but again, it's somehow in some way Sting's never beaten him with the Scorpion Deathlock. Again, Sting's winning with all these other, Muta goes to hit him with the miss, Sting ducks, rolls him up, gets the victory. So I don't know. It was just, I always, you look back at all of Sting's opponents, I thought Muta was a great opponent for Sting.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm glad that you added him in there. I know that they had a recent interaction a couple months ago, I believe, or maybe it's been longer. The last couple of years have felt like, a blur. But they definitely reconnected as Muta was closing out his career. So I would wager you'll probably see him at Revolution. But did you by chance write down your 5 favorite matches from Sting? If not, you can rattle off some of your favorites, because I just wanted to close out the WCW of it all.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, any of the Vader matches, obviously Great American Bash 90, Clash of Champions 88.
Yeah.
Those are the matches that stuck out. The Sting Rude match, just because of how vivid I remember the way that played out and how that story was told all night long. And then, I have Sting Hogan in here from Starrcade because of just how big the actual build for the match was, even though it wasn't a great match.
You want to get into that?
We can get into that, and then Triple H and Sting at WrestleMania 31.
Okay. So yeah, I had Vader at Slamboree 94, Flair at World War III 95, Cactus at Beach Blast 92, Vader at Super Brawl 3 in the strap match. And I want to make a note there, insider baseball topic here, but if you recall, Vader asks Harley Race to blade his back. Do you recall that? Have you watched that back and seen that?
I do not recall that. I will have to go watch it though.
Harley, whether he tells him or not, but I'm pretty sure Harley, like whatever it is, but after the fact, you see him bleeding, and look, it could be real, but after watching it and kind of looking for it, I'm pretty sure he gets bladed in his back, which is insanity. But then the other match, Luger and Sting versus the Steiners at Super Brawl 1, I think is just unbelievable. And then, let's get into it. Like you said, Sting kind of gets his hair longer. He kind of, things start getting a little bizarre after 95, 96 comes along. Hulk Hogan becomes the biggest. He's already the biggest face in pro wrestling history, becomes the biggest heel in pro wrestling. Bash the Beach 96. Sting, there's questions on, whose side is he on? And of course, initially he could have been he could have been the third man. That's very famous. He definitely was thought about, potentially could have been the third man. After this all happens though, Fall Brawl 96, it's leading up. It's 2 pay-per-views after Bash at the Beach. And, the whole lead up is Sting, apparently, quote unquote, attacking Lex Luger in the rain at the end of a Nitro. I can remember that like it was yesterday. And leading up to that pay-per-view, can you trust him or not? Sting saves the day, kind of proves that he's the real Sting. And the next night on Nitro, turns his back on the hard camera, says he's a free agent, and that's kind of it. We do not see him in ring until the match we're going to talk about next. But until then, he was up in the rafters. He was the Crow character, a dark character, kind of created, a hodgepodge of Scott Hall, the Crow movie from '94, kind of just this bizarre, bigger than life, but kind of in the shadows character of this anti-hero. Biggest build potentially for a WCW match ever. Starrcade 97, MCI Center. This is the biggest match, arguably, of Sting's career to that point. And for some reason or another, you get a flat finish, you get a screwy finish, you get a referee messing up stuff. Bret Hart's first interactions in WCW is as a timekeeper or referee. He didn't even wrestle. This is just a mess, and it shouldn't have been. Brian, let's hear your recollection of Starrcade 97.
A cluster.
There it is.
I just, and that was the moment that I look at and say, if you mess that up, you're going out of business. You're going to get bought by your competition. That is a mistake and an error that I don't care what explanation Eric Bischoff has. I don't care what story Hulk Hogan has. And I don't care how much Sting is there and he's playing a good guy and not going to throw anybody under the bus. I've heard from Nick Patrick recently about what he was told.
Yep.
That was a complete ball drop by Hogan and Bischoff. The finish should have been clean cut. I don't care if you bring out the entire NWO and Sting fights them all off and finds a way to beat Hogan. You had a perfect build up and it completely fell flat. And even after the fact that it was a normal count, because that's what Hogan told Nick Patrick to do, and Bret Hart's there because he was a referee earlier in the night for Zbyszko and Bischoff. And so officially, well, if he's a referee earlier in the night, he's a referee, he can restart this match. None of it made sense. And then even when the restart happened and Sting hit the big Stinger splash and Sting put the Scorpion Deathlock on, the way the match should have ended in the first place, you've got, was it Scott Norton and Buff Bagwell that come to the ring for no reason. Sting hits them with the weakest punches ever and knocks them out of the ring. If you look at that and you go back and you watch that and see the way that Norton fell out of the ring, he no-sold that thing, completely just started walking away. Like, what is the purpose of doing that at that point? You should have just restarted the match and had Sting beat Hogan. It just, the whole thing, and yes, Bischoff said, Well, at the end of the night, you still got your finish. You still had the outcome that you
that's
wanted.
that's a terrible. I'm sorry. That's a
It is.
terrible way to look at it.
It is. But I go
Phrasing.
back to what I mentioned earlier about Lex Luger stole all the momentum out of this thing,
Yeah, he
anyways,
did.
when he won the title 6 months earlier. So, the way and Luger beat Hogan clean in the
Yep.
torture rack. Hogan actually tapped to the torture rack. So
Yep.
for me, it's like there was something else there. Hogan felt threatened. Hogan knew he was losing that top spot. Hogan knew that, he did the same thing with Warrior. He didn't want to lose the title to Warrior. He told Vince, don't give this guy the title. You're going to see what happens. And that's why they took the title off of Warrior so quick after he beat Hogan, because he just wasn't drawing. And maybe Hogan felt like the same thing was happening with Sting. But if Hogan would have just put Sting over clean that night, they could have continued that all the way through 1998. They could have had their rematches. They could have had Hogan coming back for Sting. And at some point, yes, you can have a fluke, some cheating, cost Sting the title, and then have Sting be this talking character all of a sudden. But, without the fluky finish, do we get the Goldberg run that we had? Because
Right.
if Sting had been champion in the summer of, June, July of 98, then you don't get that match in that moment you have down in Atlanta on Nitro when Goldberg beats Hogan. It's just ironic that in between Sting's reign, when Sting should have been the top guy and the guy that's far and away the biggest thing going, you got Luger beating Hogan clean and you get Goldberg beating Hogan clean. But when you look at what happened with Sting, for some reason, Sting couldn't get the clean win. It just made no sense.
It's almost as if Hogan felt, maybe Luger got a bad shake in WWE. Here, have this moment. It's free TV. Who cares? I'll win the belt back in 6 days. Goldberg's a new guy. He looks like he's like bigger than me. It's believable. Like Hogan could have thought all those things and said, "I'm not giving it to this face painted guy again. I did that to Warrior, and look what happened." And I'm in agreement with you, man. Here's another interesting point, though. You mentioned how Scott Norton didn't sell for Sting there. Random fact, but Slamboree 93 was supposed to be Sting versus Scott Norton, and Scott Norton was at the height of his New Japan Pro Wrestling powers there. And the match was set, but there was a match graphic for it, and Norton reportedly was not cool with putting Sting over. Match never happened, so we got Sting versus The Prisoner, a.k.a. Nails. How about that?
Yeah, you kind of got me with that one. I didn't know that one. So, okay, we each got each other. I got you on Muda, you got me on Scott Norton.
I'm disgraced with the Muda thing.
it just, but for some reason, I look back and again, I've listened to podcasts and I heard everybody's side of the story.
Yeah.
But just like Conrad Thompson would say, you didn't give the guy a victory because he wasn't tan. Come on.
Yeah, give me a break.
And his heart wasn't into it. And again, I mentioned this earlier. Sting had some things he was battling in his personal life around this time too.
Yeah.
But I still feel like he came to play that night. He wasn't going to go 18 months of a build
right
to let everything fall flat when you're showcasing the payoff. And he looked great. The opening sequence that they had when he had the drop kick looked great. Everything just, I just hear Dusty Rhodes saying Pat and Stinger drop kick, and that whole match, like he looked great. Like I wish he would have wore that outfit the entire Crow run and not the double singlet or whatever you want to call it thing that he ended up wearing.
Right.
I just felt like that bodysuit just again made him look like a bigger superhero. There's just a lot of things that night I feel like ruined so much.
It really did. And you know what I love about that match though? The entrance. Like it looked like Sting, not that he didn't care, but it was just like that was the Crow character, but we've only seen him sitting up there. Like this is him in the moment. He looks like he's just like, I'm here. This is me. Like no emotion. That's what I wanted,
But I disagree because the no emotion part I like.
Okay.
But for 18 months, he's coming out of the crowd. He's coming from the rafters. Since when did Sting create a theme song?
That, yes.
When is he backstage with the boys to walk out? It made no sense. They should have had Hogan come out first. They should have had Hogan, kind of do his thing, look around. There's a moment of suspense, like where's Sting coming from? Is he coming from under the ring? Is he coming from the crowd? Is he coming from the rafters? And Hogan should have cut some promo like, I knew he wouldn't show up. I knew he's a coward, blah, 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 blah. And then you can have your fireworks happen, your little sparklers from the top of the arena, and then Sting drops down and he literally lands right in front of Hogan. Let's go of the zip line, and they're face to face, because the face to face they had, the camera work that was done where they were showing the snow happening, and then Hogan and Nick Patrick's there, but Hogan and Sting are face to face. That was really cool too. But that was like the best part of the match, was just that suspense right before the bell rang. And then it all went downhill from there.
Quote, and then the bell rang, right?
Yeah.
But that is fun. I never really put that together. Like, why didn't he just come down straight up? And like, that would have not only like, the fact that he hadn't been he'd been coming from the ceiling anyway, but like, you did this the whole time. Like, what made him think, oh, let's just have him come out normal entrance? I think they were just thinking more traditional, like this is how he goes about an actual match. But it would have been so much cooler had he just dropped right in front of him, and that'd have been such a moment. The match could have started right there. It would have been hot from the beginning. But
and the whole laser show that you couldn't even really pick out what they were showing on the ceiling. It just production's come a long way in 20 some years.
It truly has. To wrap up WCW though, you mentioned Goldberg. Sting and Goldberg had a match at Slamboree 99, which I only mention because Sting had his white boots on for that match, contrasted with his black gear, which I kind of liked.
His taped boots. And the saying from what I heard was Sting, his boots were in such bad shape, he had to spack them up like that.
Wow.
But I do think, regardless if that's the truth or not, I think the white contrasting boots looked cool, even though they were just taped up. That was again a leaner Sting, someone who had come back from a little bit time away, and I like that Sting.
Yeah,
I like that too. Sting going into
Showtime Sting.
Showtime Sting. I love the match with when the red and yellow Hogan came back on Nitro, and it was Hogan, Goldberg, and Sting versus Rick Steiner, Sid, and Kevin Nash. Like, that's the Sting that I liked. And then I'll be honest, once WWF started taking over and The Rock came into the picture in Austin, I was drawn away from WCW. Yeah. So the final year and a half of WCW, I really didn't pay a lot of attention to. I knew what had happened, but I go back and I look at his feud with Vampiro. I never really was engaged with that feud. It never drew me in, and it might have been great, and it might not have been great. But I feel like I just was disconnected, and it started with Starrcade 97, and there were some good moments in there. I think Wolfpack Sting, for as cool as it might have been on the surface, you were trying to bring back Surfer Sting's personality.
I agree with that.
And the red paint, and his hair was halfway down his back by that point. He had the goatee. Like,
the goatee, what is that?
Well, the goatee was terrible, and even now, like, what's up with the Flavor Saver? Like, I never understood why he wanted to have that little patch on the bottom of his lip. Like, it just didn't fit in for me.
No, it was a bizarre choice for sure. The Vampiro stuff I thought was interesting, just because, quite honestly, as a kid, I'm like, look, another guy, it's a bizarre looking guy, a dark character with white face paint, but he's clearly like the anti-Sting, which is crazy because Sting was the anti-hero. It was just a cool dynamic. And then lastly, I'll mention the Fall Brawl 99 heel turn, even though that was only for a month because no one bought that Sting could be a heel. But Luger throws a bat into the ring against with Sting versus red and yellow Hogan. And I think it was the white Hummer era. And Sting had the bat, and Hogan's like, come on, you got to hit him. And Sting hits Hogan, and the crowd pops. Look, the crowd pops, and Sting wins the title, and they were going crazy. But the angle after the fact, like, it just didn't work. But interesting looking back on it, I guess. But wow, man, WCW. That I asked you to do this knowing that the meat of this whole thing would be WCW, and I don't think it disappointed whatsoever. Let's dive into the conclusion here. Let's just go all in one round here. The TNA run, 4-time TNA champion. God, he was in TNA arguably the same amount, like a little bit less than the time he was in WCW, but he was there for a damn long time. Put a lot of legitimacy to TNA. He had the unfortunate match he had to deal with Jeff Hardy in 2011, the Main Event Mafia. He lost the world title to Mick Foley in a cage match, which is a fun nostalgia thing. I like Sting in TNA, and I thought, like I said, I brought legitimacy to TNA. Did you watch a lot of TNA with Sting being there, or did that kind of replenish your WCW feel? Because it did for me.
I mean, that was at a point in my life where I was just graduating college and going into the working world, and it's the priorities and the time that I had at that time to do some things. So I did not catch a lot of the TNA run. I've watched a lot of videos back. Obviously, I've seen I like the Joker Sting. I also
that too. Very fun.
The Sting that came back that was probably 220 pounds, and he went back to just wearing trunks, the long pant trunks.
Yeah, I like that too.
It brought me back to the Sting that I grew up watching, as opposed to the Crow Sting. He was throwing the reds in there, the reds and the black, but Joker Sting was a little bit different. And there's some moments in there I think about. I believe it was a baseball bat that Kurt Angle hit him with and cracked his head open for real. And I remember Kurt Angle going, "Holy shit!" Like the look on his face, like, "Uh-oh, I just cracked Sting open with a baseball bat for real." And Sting didn't flinch, but there's some moments in TNA, the Jeff Hardy thing. I remember that because that story that I've heard Bischoff tell 100 times. It all just. I remember, I think it was Jeff Jarrett that came out as Surfer Sting.
Yes.
And again, to pay homage to that character, those are moments that I remember in TNA. It wasn't any feuds. It wasn't any long storylines over a course of months or even a year. It was certain moments that I remember looking back on from the TNA run. And I just wish that TNA had more exposure. I wish they had more opportunity. They were never going to compete with WWE. But I just feel like had they been a little more mainstream, maybe I would have got drawn in a little bit more.
True. I mean, they were on Fox Sports Net at 3 p.m. after I'd come home from school. So it was not the necessarily best time for TNA back, in 05, 06. But they definitely got, bigger and better over the years. I always say that 2005 to 2009 TNA is a 5-year run for a pro wrestling company that's really tough to challenge. If you really sit back, watch a lot of it, see the pay-per-views and such. I will ask you, though, are you confusing the Ken Anderson as Sting with the Jeff Jarrett Halloween Havoc 2000 match where he led up to it as Sting, with the colors, and then they did 4 different versions of Sting throughout that match?
No, but yes, Ken Anderson. Someone came out in TNA as Sting. It was
But
they
did the same thing. Jarrett did the same thing in Havoc 2000 as well.
You're right. But I always just, anytime somebody did that, I always got a kick out of it. Just got to,
because you wanted it back. It's nostalgia.
Well, I saw a photo of him in an appearance probably 3 years ago where he actually showed up, had the long black hair still, but he painted up in the red, white, and blue.
Oh, was that the RoboCop photo?
I don't think so. I just remember seeing the photo of him wearing his red, white, and blue 90 face paint and the jacket he wore at the Great American Bash. I have to find that somewhere, but it was.
Yeah, I do think, because it was at StarCast, and I'm pretty sure they had RoboCop and him pose again. And it's funny because back then, I'm sure either the RoboCop costume was taller or they put lifts in, but Sting has got 6 inches on RoboCop now. But maybe times have been tough for RoboCop these days.
But I would call, honestly, and this is me just being honest here, 2003 to 2014, the TNA years, I would almost call those the lost chapters of my Sting fandom.
Yeah.
I kind of read the Cliff Notes version. I've seen the Cliff Notes version, but I wasn't
Yeah.
as bought in as I was from, say, 1988 to 1998, like those 10 years versus the next 10 years.
That's right. And yeah, so Sting ends his TNA career January 2014. You know, for years I've been like, I don't know if Sting never needs to go to WWE. He never needed to before. I'm sure he had opportunities potentially to go there, or if not, I never knew it. It just was like, why wouldn't WWE be interested in the top guy in the other show? But as we've been saying, they had Luger, they had all these guys jumping ship at all points. WWE never really, quote, needed Sting. But of course, it was really tough to not think, man, wouldn't it be great if Sting could get that shot? And early, I think I'm looking here, February of 2014. So, wow, 10 years ago. It's fun to see that, actually. Bill Apter was chronicling Sting's career for WWE.com, and he stated that Sting's best days may still be yet to come. And unfortunately, the Ultimate Warrior passed away after that, in that WrestleMania that year. And Sting was shown in a WWE Network documentary about that, which was an interesting piece of business. Like, wow, Sting, like, being on WWE branded material. And then we get the WWE DVD, The Best of Sting, a Blu-ray set. I know he did at least another DVD set as well.
Yeah, next time you talk to Justin LaBar, he still has my DVD Sting set.
I will make sure I let him know that. I have it if you'd like to borrow it. But so I'm in college at this point, 2014, and yeah, like this has all been great. Like he's in the 2K15 video game. Like that couldn't be a better thing to see. He's gonna get figures. He's in the game. He got DVDs. Great. To me, I'm good with that. Like all I wanted is like the best matches of Sting, but like on like a home video release, something. Never what I thought, though. And arguably one of the best Survivor Series matches, at least in the last 10 years, traditional Survivor Series 5-on-5. And an arguably a huge match with the Authority versus Cena's team. The lights go out. I couldn't believe, I'm just getting goosebumps thinking about like how this happened. The lights go out and I hear this like squawk over the PA, over the speaker off the Tron, and my buddy goes, "What is that Sting?" And I was like, "Look, chill. It's not Sting. What are we talking about? No way." But I was all of a sudden Sting shows up to make the save, costs the match for the Authority, attacks Triple H, Scorpion Death Drop. I was in shock. I'm in shock that it honestly happened at all. What a moment in wrestling history. Brian, do you remember where you were when that match happened, Survivor Series 2014, when Sting somehow, someway made his debut for WWE?
Oh, do I ever remember where I was? So always, my wife, big Italian family, always does the Sunday dinner over to her parents' house. And I was watching Survivor Series on my phone after dinner in the recliner, and we were getting ready to leave. And we had like a 20-minute drive from her parents' house back to our house where we were living at the time. And I had Dana drive because I was watching the event on my phone. And I remember we were on Route 65, driving through Ambridge, heading back to Baden where we lived. And that, to your point, the squawk hit, and I lost my mind. And my wife like, "What's wrong? What's going on?" And I'm like, "It's Sting," in my best Schiavone voice. And, there are so many things like I remember about that appearance. The camera shot from the very wide, far away shot to where they zoomed into him. That reminded me
shot.
of, and I forget what year it was at WrestleMania when they did the same thing with Hogan. They went from the wide shot and they zoomed in. So like
WrestleMania 8.
So I think about the camera shot. I also remember seeing Rusev's flag. For some reason, they did not move Rusev's flag. So as Sting's entering the ring, you see Rusev's flag sitting right there. Like that's something, and I said, again, production-wise, they could have done a little bit better. he gets in the ring. You hear the holy shit chants. This is awesome. And I recall Scott Armstrong's count. Like, I think he counted so slow on that one. He brought his arm back. Like,
that's funny you noticed that. I noticed the same thing, Brian.
Because you would think that he would have hit 2 and it would have happened at 2. But I feel like he wanted to make sure that they didn't mess up that timing so that moment could happen. He delayed that 1 count for so long. And
take notes, Nick Patrick.
So you get them face to face, and they're doing the stare down. They're walking each other around the ring. I also recall what Sting was wearing, those leather pants. I was like, what the hell is that? I felt like in the leather jacket that looked like it was from 1997. Like, there was just some things about it that I felt like they missed the mark on. Again, I'm overlooking this. I'm overthinking this because I've watched it 1,000 times.
Oh, yeah.
And then the fact that after he death drops Triple H with the weakest kick to the gut that you've ever given anybody to put him down. Then after 7 minutes of laying down, Sting rolls, who was he? Rolled Dolph Ziggler over Seth
Ziggler
Rollins,
was the last.
It was.
Yeah, Ziggler was the last guy in the match.
But, and Triple H is like looking down at them when Sting's coming up, and the camera catches Triple H looking down to make sure they're out of the way. Like, there was a lot that you could tell they couldn't rehearse because they wanted to be a true surprise pop. So they probably just went over it in the van or the bus in the back before the event and said, hey, here's how we're going to do this thing. And they kind of, with no chance to rehearse. So I'll give them the pass on that one. But yes, I remember everything about that night. And I remember watching it back on the WWE Network 100 times. I didn't go to bed until 3 a.m. that night. I just watched it so many times.
I mean, honestly, that entire story is, the genesis, like the real reason, like we are doing this episode. Like, I know, like, that passion, exactly where you were driving. I love that you had your wife drive so you could finish the show. Like, that stuff I would do. Like, that, it's so perfect. That's such an incredible moment. I remember I was in college. I remember exactly where I was. I remember I had the Blu-ray, and I was just like, oh, I can't believe it's actually happening. Like, just what a moment. And, look, this is November, and you don't know what's going to happen. You just assume, all right, that's it. Like, great moment, whatever. It was great, and that's it. January 19th, 2015, out of nowhere, Sting's backstage. But there we go. Is that a photo of Sting, or is it just Sting? And
that's not Sting. That's a picture of Sting, as Booker T would say.
Oh my God. So Sting comes out and, gave Ziggler, Ryback, Eric Rowan their jobs back, which, God, some of the players at this moment of WWE, they're lucky they had Sting to carry the load here. Triple H challenges him for, an episode of Raw just for a confrontation. And out of nowhere, they had this confrontation now at Fastlane. Sting points to the sign. And we're off to the races, and you mentioned it. You said the first time you ever got to see Sting wrestle was WrestleMania 31, or I like to call WrestleMania Play Button. I loved the aesthetics of this pay-per-view, the outdoor atmosphere, Levi Stadium, West Coast, like early start. The lighting was amazing. The Orton-Rollins match was amazing. The end of the show was amazing with Rollins. But Sting, Triple H, the Attitude Era Monday Night War battle, honestly. DX shows up. NWO show up. Of course, we all know what has to happen. The sledgehammer is the dagger. What are your thoughts on this match? You were there. Did you like that the NWO helped Sting after he tried to bring them down?
I think it was fitting. If you're going to have DX get involved to help Triple H, Sting needs somebody on his side. And I just think it was the nostalgia, the Monday Night Wars. So did it make sense? No. Did it make sense in a way? Yes. So I actually liked it. I liked the engagement. It added something to the match. You knew you weren't going to get Sting being in top shape to do, hell, by that point, Sting wasn't able to really crouch down to hold somebody in a scorpion deathlock. He'd sit on their back, and Triple H would have to do a push-up to make sure that the hold looked legit.
Yeah.
Little things like that. Throughout the match, when Sting's like rubbing his hands through his hair to make sure his hair sits back flat so it didn't look like, Jack Nicholson.
That's right.
It just, again, things that I recall because I was so into the moment, being there at Levi Stadium, then you watch it back on TV. And I remember the match and hearing DX's music play and then hearing NW's music play. I was then waiting for Vince McMahon to come out and then Eric Bischoff to come out, because why not have
been great?
Bischoff and McMahon? Like, if you're going to tell that story of the Monday Night Wars, but then you watch it back on TV, right? And on Peacock, and you hear Michael Cole say, "When did you ever think you'd get DX and the New Age Outlaws in the ring at the same time?" Like, he messed that up. I don't know if you caught that, but he meant to say NWO.
No,
he said, yeah, if you go back, he says, "Never did you think you'd see DX and the New Age Outlaws in the ring at the same time?" And I'm like, okay. And they tried way too hard to bury Sting. JBL tried with his little, what he was saying, all the lines that he was saying.
Didn't Michael Cole with the "This is what the big time is" or something?
Yeah, there were a lot of things.
What is that?
But it was cool that when Sting came out again, and like even the drums in the beginning, it was a real cool entrance that he had, but the drums were off.
Unique.
The drum beats were off. There was so much. Again, I think about all these things. I think back, and I'm like,
I love the nuances that you add to this, though, Brian. This proves how big of a fan you are, not just of Sting, but of the business. Like, the little nuances some people might not notice, and you are pinpointing them with amazing accuracy.
When he debuts at Survivor Series, he's in the traditional Crow look with the worst leather pants and jacket he ever had. But then he slowly added, and I thought some of the stuff he did on Raw on the road to WrestleMania was great. I think that opening Raw, the Stephanie McMahon interaction, I think the stuff he did where he saved Orton, I think all that was really good. And he started to build in a little bit of the color. So he had the red that he built in. But we went from Survivor Series, the traditional Crow Sting, to when he comes out of WrestleMania, he's got the red jacket on with the red face paint tied into the black and white face paint. They tried to bring more personality out. So he went from being this, we're going to debut him as a stone cold Crow Sting, but then he comes out with all this personality and he's talking like he's, the best thing on the mic. But all these things that you think back on and you look at, and let's talk about the outcome.
Yeah.
Was I surprised by the outcome? Maybe a little bit. Because
really?
I thought you would put him over, but and
you thought WWE was going to put over the WCW guy? WCW doesn't exist in WWE.
I thought it would be part of the deal. I thought it'd be part of him agreeing. It's built into the contract, and if it goes against that, maybe he gets additional money. But Scott Hall said it best when he heard about what the finish was going to be. He was like, "Dude, who's your agent? Like, you're going to come in and agree to lose? That doesn't make any sense. If you're coming in for this short run, you should come in to win." And he was always worried about not being used right by Vince McMahon. And that's why he didn't make the jump when WCW folded. Well, he got the same treatment here. And if you want to believe what everyone says, and it kind of held true about an hour later, 2 hours later in the night, they were trying to set up Rock versus Triple H at WrestleMania 32, which eventually fell through the cracks. But the reasoning was Triple H had to beat Sting because later on that night they were going to set up the angle of Rock and Triple H for WrestleMania 32. So if Sting would have ended up winning, that would have made Triple H look weak against The Rock. And here we are, ironically, 10 years later, and Triple H is running the company and The Rock's on the board and they're engaging with each other. And if Triple H was in good health right now, I think you'd see a Rock Triple H match 10 years after the fact. But, a little surprised. The way that they did it with the sledgehammer, I get. It also took a super kick from Shawn Michaels. There are a lot of things. And in the end, when they shook hands, and again, it was a moment. It wasn't necessarily something that I was looking for and say, oh, it was a great feud. It was a moment. That match was more of a moment than a feud because you had the nostalgia. You got to see Sting in the ring at WrestleMania. And that at the time was supposed to be what completed his career. But we know that there was another chapter to come.
Yeah. What a crazy, almost year just for Sting being in WWE there. Um, it was bizarre, yeah, that he tried to be, the guy on a mic, and he cut good promos, but he was not the promo guy, especially after the fact as Crow Sting. Although, to be fair, if you, your words, if you hadn't watched really a lot of the TNA stuff, even if you like the Joker stuff, he was way more confident and comfortable, I thought, on the mic than he used to be. But that comes with being a 20-year vet in the business at the point. But yeah, maybe just some choices here and there. And it is funny how Triple H and The Rock could have absolutely had a match at 32. Would that not have been better than The Rock just lighting a name on fire at Mania 32? And it's crazy how those two are ensconced in a, kind of in a feud right now in WWE, and Sting's going to retire all at the same time. It's just wild how, we're talking about the 90s, this whole episode here, and you're really, they said it at Mania 28, end of an era, but we are really, really winding down with the amount of legends that are even alive, let alone working consistently. Of course, an accident, a rough spot, a turnbuckle, a buckle bomb from Rollins to Sting later in 2015. And Sting got a legit neck injury, which was incredibly unfortunate. Rollins was, oh man, just devastated that this happened. I mean, Sting was like a hero to him, and he looked up to Sting, and never did Sting actually have the surgery, at least after the fact. He reneged on it. He didn't want to have it. It was cervical spinal stenosis, but he didn't have the side effects that commonly would be attributed to that. So he just knew he was done and announced that he was going to retire. He had a Hall of Fame induction 2016. And we thought that was it. It was also funny, as I'm going to note here, that Sting on a show, the network show, Legends with JBL, said he didn't have the surgery still. He would still hope that he would get that match against The Undertaker, which, quote unquote, unfinished business. But not only did that match not happen, but a match that was pitched from Sting, which would have been a cinematic match with The Undertaker. Not only did that not happen, but Undertaker's final match was a cinematic match, and it was with AJ Styles, which actually turned out great. And it makes me just wish we could have gotten Sting and Taker in a cinematic match. I think it could have been unbelievable. I don't know necessarily, unless they were in their primes, would have had a great in-ring match, but I think a cinematic match would have been great, Taker and Sting. You think?
I'm not into the cinematic stuff. I wasn't into the Styles match. I wasn't into any of the Hardy compound stuff. Like those things to me, just I wasn't a fan of them. Now to see Taker and Sting, great.
Right.
I mean, we didn't even get a Taker Sting face off. Like
no interaction at all.
Some type of engagement. You didn't need a match. You just needed some type of engagement, a tease. I mean, the closest thing we had to it was there was a photo after WrestleMania 31 of Sting and Undertaker in the airport together flying back to Dallas.
Wow.
And they're just talking, waiting at the gate to get on the plane. And, we didn't even mention this in the WCW talks, but, I remember him fighting Mean Mark in WCW or NWA. I remember him fighting Bruiser Mastino, which was Kane.
Yeah. Right? Isn't that crazy?
So he did get his time in the ring with those guys, and he knew those guys. But again, yes, to have those characters, the Undertaker and the Sting character, engage in some way, that's probably the only thing that is left to be desired in Sting's career. But he did say at the end of that Hall of Fame speech, like he always did, the only thing for sure about Sting is nothing's for sure. And it's almost like he knew something was coming in the future. He just didn't know it was going to be AEW.
That's right. And before we go into that, I did not anticipate that the juice box would have a Bruiser Mastino reference in it. So
shout out bingo card.
That's right, Brian. Let's get into it, man. This was incredible. End of 2020, WWE stopped selling Sting merch, pulled it from WWE shop. And, nowadays, I think even more so, even though that's only 4 years ago, fans are in tune to that by the minute. As soon as someone's stuff is either not available anymore or what have you, it's like, oh, either their contract's up, they're signing with someone, but who knows where they actually land. Out of nowhere, in a match during Dynamite, Winter is Coming, where Ricky Starks and Powerhouse Hobbs were against Darby Allin, which I love that Darby is still a part of this all the way to the end. And Darby tagging with none other than Cody Rhodes, who has his own story he needs to finish in a month or so. Sting makes his debut in AEW out of nowhere. This is during the pandemic. This is a bizarre time for wrestling, and not really any fans unless it's just like crew from the show or family or friends that can make it to Daly's place. But Sting makes his debut in AEW, and first time on TNT since the last episode of Nitro from March of 2001. Man, this was so bizarre, but I was so thrilled. I'm like, hey, all right, Sting's in AEW. Let's see what happens here. He confirmed a week later that he was with AEW, and boom, we're off to the races. And oddly enough, maybe this is how it was supposed to go now that I'm looking back on it, because they knew this pay-per-view was going to be a mainstay. Revolution 2021, Team Taz versus Darby Allin and Sting in a street fight, which was a pre-taped kind of cinematic match that now I've learned that you hate, Brian. But this was a great match. Again, it was something that Sting could pull off. And I always say, complain about AEW or love it, whatever your thoughts on AEW. There's one thing that I don't think you can deny. It's kind of a two-pronged thing. One, if there's something that's obvious, like an obvious thing that you see, oh man, like that should work, more often than not, AEW pulls the trigger on it. They know that it will work. They'll do it. Sting comes in, and you have Darby Allin, a young up-and-coming wrestler, who half his face is painted. He's got tattoos. He's got this dark aura about him. Why wouldn't you want to team him up with a guy that he would look up to that looks kind of similar in Sting? So not only did they pull the trigger on that, but it's lasted this whole time, and Sting has never lost, and they're going to close out his career together. And the other part of that is AEW's treatment of legends is honestly unlike anything I've really ever seen in wrestling. Almost every single legend that's come in has been treated with respect and been used pretty well. Jake Roberts, Arn Anderson, the list goes on and on. Ric Flair, of course, now. Just so many legends that have been used and utilized in a way that's respectable and not just for this little moment or this little segment or a commentary. They're being utilized for good stuff on screen and to further the new stars. So to see Sting with Darby Allin, I love it. And I'm not going to really go too much into detail, but we did get the Sting Great Muta interaction, which is great. Great Muta's final match in January of last year. Sting, Darby, and Muta had their final match. Had Muta's final match, rather. And now, we're here. Revolution's this weekend. Sting's final match. Brian, AEW is a breath of fresh air, at least whenever it first came into the fray. I think it still is 5 years in. Sting being there, do you like it? Do you like what they've done with them? Are you happy with it? And just give me your thoughts on how you see Revolution playing out. This is his final match. It's his terms. Let's see what you got.
So again, just like Survivor Series, I remember watching Dynamite when Winter is Coming and Sting debuted. And the second that first beat of that theme music played, like, I don't know, something in my mind just said Sting, because it sounded like the first beat of the old Crow theme song. And initially, super excited because, especially the early going, I was all in on AEW. I felt like it was that alternative that we were looking for, that opportunity to create some competition, to see new talent, to get new, fresh ideas. But the longer it went on, to be honest with you, like I felt, now Sting wasn't overused in the ring in any way, shape, or form,
Right.
But even the fact that he debuted in a match with Darby and kind of took Darby under his wing, I felt like they could have done more. There could have been more throughout this, that he didn't need to be with Darby or Darby didn't need him. Sting could have been used in some other capacity. And I definitely don't think he needed to wrestle. Looking at 2 to 3 dozen matches he's probably had in the time with AEW. But it's good to see him because, again, for the years I lost in TNA, I gained back in AEW. But as far as how do I see this playing out, I initially thought it was going to be Sting versus Darby. Sting does the favor. Even if Ric Flair was along and Ric Flair screwed Sting and Darby won and Darby could have made a heel turn, that could still happen at Revolution. Just in a tag team match. I don't think, like, for some reason, I'll say it. I think if you didn't have the title EVPs, there's no reason you have the Young Bucks in this match. I just don't. I don't get it. I don't understand it.
Okay.
Are we gonna have adversaries from Sting's past, in addition to Ric Flair, come out and try to cost him, and then Sting? Like, I see the Young Bucks. Do we get the Hardys that engage to help Sting? Because Jeff Hardy grew up on Sting. The story's been told numerous times about how much of a fan of Sting Jeff Hardy was. Lex Luger obviously is not in the physical shape to get involved in the match, but who else could come down to help Sting when he's against all odds again? I don't know, but I feel like I don't see how they could have Sting and Darby win. Because you're going to retire Sting as a champion and have a tournament for the tag titles. Darby has to find a tag team partner. I don't know. I've heard the idea floated around that the Young Bucks win, and they set up an angle to where Garrett and Steven Borden, Sting's sons, actually are hired by AEW, and they form a new tag team, the New Blade Runners or something like that, to where
never heard that.
Well, there's been some videos of the two of them working out, and they're both in great shape, but
yeah.
Could Sting's sons, as Dad goes into the sunset, I feel like they'll be involved in the match in some way, shape, or form because they've already been attacked by the Young Bucks. So you're going to get involvement from them. I still would have to do a 50-50 coin toss on Sting hasn't lost a match. Is this going to be Sting going to lose his last match? And if Sting loses, again, I feel like you got to have Flair cost him the match, because it just completes the story. It completes the full circle, the holistic, the story of Sting's career. Flair did not the honors, but Flair put him on the map at a 45-minute time limit draw in 1988. And for as much as Flair put him on the map, Flair is going to help end his story too. So that's how I would do it.
My thought on this whole thing, like you said, do you retire as champ? Do you want to do that? Do you want to have Darby find someone else? Like, I'm sure they could do that and navigate that, but I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to go about it. I do ultimately think it's going to come down to Ric Flair. As crazy as that is to say in 2024, when he could have died 7 years ago and he's still here. But I either see Flair, because he was at the last Dynamite, they interviewed him, Renee interviewed him, and he goes, I thought when I was involved with this, I would be more involved and I'd be here every week and really be part of this thing wholeheartedly. And as he's saying this, I'm like, one, I think you're right. Like, you haven't been here, so what's going on there? But at the same time, I'm thinking, it seems like he might be planting a seed to turn on Sting potentially. They show him go into the Young Bucks locker room. To me, it's one of two things. Either Flair is on the Young Bucks side and will absolutely somehow turn on Sting and end it, and that's it, and perfect circle moment there. Or, which I would prefer, because to me, I could care less how they have to figure out what to do with the titles if Sting and Darby win. That's AEW's problem. I'm here for the moment of this pay-per-view and Sting's final match and how that ends, whether it's a win or a loss. And to me, I'm having them win in a triumphant way. I would say, how great would it be if Flair tries to turn on Sting, and Sting, who has been turned on by Flair how many times, negates it and actually overcomes that and wins. I think that would be the way to do it. But I don't know, man. The excitement level, I think it's palpable as we're talking about it, and I got chills just now thinking of, like, it's in Greensboro. It's in this legendary building, and everybody knows this is it. Like, not everybody knows when their final match is happening. Flair, had the one at Mania 24, even though he wrestled after the fact. We all kind of knew that was going to be it, and that's what made that match so great. And this has that type of feel to me. But
Well, the
like you,
question
I think it's a coin flip.
where does the match go? Because you've got a triple threat
Whew,
for
yeah.
the world title, and I am strongly in the side that your world championship is your main event of every pay-per-view. Should always
Right.
be that way. I don't think this match, I don't think Sting can supersede that. I think for the legitimacy of that title and this company, you've got to keep Joe, Page, and Swerve as your main event. I also don't think you put Sting and Darby on before that match. You need the quote unquote buffer match. So they might go on third from last. Then you throw in
Something.
something. Maybe you throw in, the tag match with FTR and Moxley and Claudio.
Right.
There's got to be something in between, or you could do the women's world title match. So Perazzo and Storm. You could do that, but you can't put this on as the main event. I mean, in theory, you can do whatever you want because you're Tony Khan, it's your company.
Right.
And if you want Sting to go out as the credits come up, and that's that, great. But I just feel like I would not put this on last. I would put this on either third to last or somewhere. Maybe you start the night with it.
Wow. Don't you want that anticipation, though?
You do, but at the same time, I don't know. I just
The only thing for
think
sure with Sting is nothing's for sure. We don't know.
I mean, there's listen. It's a good card. Like,
Yeah, that's the other part too.
One of the matches that I really am looking forward to is Eddie Kingston and Danielson. I think that's going to be a
Yeah.
hell of a match. I don't know.
The finish of the AEW title match factors in, because unless they're doing this triple threat to hold off on Swerve winning, I think Swerve is eventually going to be the champion. Let's say Swerve wins the title at this show. Wouldn't you want that to be the main event and to close out the show and have him have that moment? And conversely, I don't think Sting would want to take away from that or take away from the match in general being last. I think Sting would almost prefer to not be last, whether he has say in that or not, I guess. But
well, if Sting, listen, if this match is the last match, then you got to put the world title match somewhere in the middle of the show, because it can't be the match that precedes or maybe it can be. I don't. Because if Swerve were to win and the crowd's going to be buzzing because of it, then they've got to match that buzz, right? Sting, Darby, and the Bucks have to go out and match that.
Yeah. I think Sting's final match would match that buzz.
Again, the fact that it's a tornado match and they're going to be all over the place, it's
going to be crazy.
I don't know. Those aren't matches that I am big fans of. I like keeping it in the ring, but if you're going to work within the capabilities of Sting, if you're going to do what he can do from a physicality standpoint, he's not going to be able to wrestle for 20 minutes in the ring, which he wouldn't have to, but it gives you more opportunity to create some moments outside of the ring or in a non-traditional matchup.
Yeah, and I think overall, just, Darby is a bump machine. The Young Bucks will be flying around the ring for Sting, and outside of the ring, there's going to be interference galore, tables, I'm sure. I don't know, man. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so, I talked about, you talked about bumps and tables and whatnot.
Yeah.
So the first time I saw Sting wrestle was 31.
Yeah.
And then when AEW was coming to Pittsburgh, I've been at all the AEW shows, and I vividly remember the one show a year and a half ago or so. And I was fortunate enough to get some tickets from a friend within the company. And normally those tickets would be down on the floor where you sit in the good seats. And I remember getting to the arena, going the will call, getting my tickets, and it was actually it was on the first level, it wasn't down the floor. And I'm thinking, well, this is odd. And I got a text and said, how are the seats? I said, they're great, thanks. I wasn't going to be a jerk. And I was told just wait. Because I remember texting you at the time. I texted you at the time, and I knew Josh Eisenberg was sitting in the same area I was sitting. And there was a point, I forget who the match was, but Sting comes up the steps, and I'm in the second row of where he jumped off the balcony. And I'm like, this is amazing. This is why I was put in this seat, because they knew this spot was going to be here, and they knew what kind of fan of Sting I was. So that's the closest I've ever been. If you actually watch that match back, I'm in the background pounding my chest like I'm Sting, and I'm doing my Stinger howl up to the crowd as he dives off the balcony. It was just, so there's another moment that you remember, like, okay, I saw the first match in person that I saw at 31. I saw that moment where he dived off. I wish I could be down in Greensboro. But again, it's the memories that you think of. You think of even the matches you're not at. It's the fact that when you were a kid, the reason I tell everyone, the reason why I'm in wrestling is because of Sting. If it weren't for Sting, I probably wouldn't be in wrestling the way I was. And, when Sting always said at his retirement speech, I know a lot of you were Sting, you were me for Halloween. I was Sting for Halloween at least 4 times. I said I was Surfer Sting at least 2 or 3 times, and I was Crow Sting at least 2 or 3 times. And it's just amazing that whether I was 5 years old being Sting, or if I was Sting when I was over my sister-in-law's house, so I was in my 30s when I was Sting before too. It's like, that's always something that, for me, he attached me to wrestling. And never got to meet him. No, there's no autographs or anything like that. None of that's needed. It's just, if it weren't for him, I wouldn't be having this call with you right now. I wouldn't have watched wrestling my entire life. And it's just, I'll say that I'm grateful that he was a character and he got in the business, because like a lot of others probably wouldn't be a wrestling fan if it weren't for Sting. But I will say this. I feel like, and this is no knock against him, I think it's the way he was booked and the things that were done throughout his career. I feel like for as great of a career he had, it could have been even better. I can
agree with that.
I feel like whether it's the certain way match is finished, or the certain ways that, he was a X amount of time, 6-time WCW champ, 8-time WCW IWA champ, but he never had that reign that was I don't need a Roman Reigns type reign or a CM Punk type reign, but it was always like it was a 2-month reign and he was losing the title again. And I felt like he never got that opportunity to really hold on to a title and be the guy and run with it. And that's what I was always looking forward to. So I just felt like there was some things that were left to be desired about his career. And should the WWE jump happen sooner? Probably. But for TNA, they're thankful it didn't happen sooner, because for the TNA run, TNA got their run. And that's where I'm at with Sting. And people ask me all the time, where do you have him in your all-time rankings? Listen, I'm not going to be here as some homer and say, oh, he's the second or third greatest wrestler of all time. Yeah. I'm not naive. I'm not biased like that. I don't have Sting in my top 5 or 10 of all time, because I look at some of the people that he would have to jump over. The only person, maybe 2 or 3, I'd have 2 or 3 people from WCW, but Ric Flair is really the only one that you could put up there with Austin, Rock, Hogan, Cena, Reigns, Lesnar. And you got Jericho. I have Jericho up in my top 10 because he's just had such a long career. Sting's had the long career, but he was never the main event guy on the biggest show. And I never really thought about that till I was preparing for this show. I never really said, oh, he was only in the WWE for a year and he had that short run. But that's where anyone who is a top name in the business, Ric Flair even did it, right? He went to WWF twice.
Yeah, right.
I just feel like Like I can't put Sting above those guys. Triple H, I can't put him above Randy Orton. Like I just look at their careers versus his, and had they all been in WCW, it might have been a different story. But just I don't want to say minor leagues because WCW, I said he already fought he wrestled the big guys. He had the marquee matches. It just, at the end, and this may shock some people to hear me say this, but it's just my truth and honest opinion. Great career. The reason I'm in the wrestling, love the guy, love the character. But to his fault or not to his fault, the only thing that was his fault was his choice of not to go to WWE.
Yeah.
It was everything else, though, that always just never added up. For some reason, he just always seemed to get the short end of the stick.
Yeah, man. And it's not really shocking to hear you say that. I really admire that you're being honest, especially when you're such a diehard fan. Like again, clear reason why I asked you to be on here today. Just the plethora of information and knowledge and fandom that you've had over the years for this character that we've grown to love and appreciate for all this time. And yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I would say overall he's probably my favorite pro wrestler of all time, but I probably would put him in maybe the top 15. Maybe I could sneak him into top 10, and I would only say sneak him into top 10 because of he's the best guy that barely was in WWE and still had a 30 plus year career. It'd be different if he only wrestled for 10 years and 2 of them were in WWE. But I mean, he was in WCW for 15 years, TNA for almost the same amount of time, maybe 10 years, and AEW now for another 25 plus years and 1 year maybe with WWE. And to me, I love that. Like, I love that there is a character in this business where egos drive it. And of course, WWE is it, and of course Sting went to WWE. He had to really prove that, he is worth what WCW saw in him and TNA and all these other companies that saw him in him. And it was just unfortunate that by the time he made it there, not only might it have been too late, but, unfortunately injuries sidelined him to where he was out of it and in AEW before we knew it. But damn, Brian, this has been one hell of an episode. This is the 64th episode of the Juice Box, and not only has it been the longest episode, but I think it's been the most informative, fun, entertaining. I love WCW as much as a lot of people I know, maybe outside of you. I mentioned this way at the beginning of this episode where I mention WCW all the time, like to my friends and online, and there's very, very few people that I personally know that watched WCW as it happened. And people talk about WCW in retrospect and all these things, but the fact that, the Monday Night Wars and people love that was just a 5.5 year period. Like, that's such a small sample of the whole, just wrestling in general, considering WWE's been around for 60 years. So there's not that many people I know that even actively watch WCW as it happened. They only look back on it or see how WWE portrays it and this negativity and how they were the loser. And Mania 31 proved that to people. And it's I know you and we went back and forth, all these different matches and feuds, opponents, moments, and WCW was really that great alternative to WWE. Even if, I could sit here and I'd love WWE. I mean, without WWE, I don't think any of us really are watching wrestling, but having that alternative and a guy you could root for like Sting, just, I don't know, it makes it special.
Here's what I'll say.
Yeah.
When you look at Ric Flair, 16-time champ, John Cena, Randy Orton, Triple H, all over a dozen title reigns, right? If you look at the overall collection And I'm not just talking about world titles, right? Television title, one of the best U.S. champions in WCW history, tag team
Yes.
champion. He won Battle Bowl. He won the King of Cable. He did all these things that, those things get overlooked as well too. It's not all about world titles.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy was always positioned to be a star. And the fans, right, whether we're talking PWI or otherwise, right, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 time most popular wrestler of the year. And most of those were the Surfer Sting years. And then obviously I think the Crow year he won as well. But it just showed you that if you are listening to this, or you are between the ages of 36 and 46 years old, Surfer Sting is what you grew up on. And you were such a big Surfer Sting fan that it just was an easy transition to be a Crow Sting fan when he was going against the NWO. And I'm glad he wasn't the third man. I'm glad Hogan was the third guy, because I just feel like, everything happens for a reason. It wouldn't have been as good of a feud if the roles were reversed and Hogan was Sting and Sting was Hogan.
No way.
It wouldn't have worked. It just wouldn't have worked. So, for as bad as the angle ended at Starrcade, the run that he had, I look at from 1988 at the Clash of Champions until that match at Starrcade 97. You're talking 9 years. Aside from whenever he was injured, he was the man. He was WCW's Hulk Hogan when Hulk Hogan was WWE, running WrestleManias 1 through 9 or 10 when he was there for the early years. It was just, Sting was that guy. And again, he may not have come up on top every time, but he was the one constant that was always there.
Absolutely, man. I just what a career he's had. Like you said, even the championships weren't the most important. There's always other things that he was proving. Most popular wrestler, when there's plenty of other baby faces and over talent. But when it's the same guy and he's been there for so long, and he it's just a testament to his character and how you said he evolves to this complete 180. Doesn't say anything, sits in the rafters, dark paint and a bat, and just like the antithesis of what Surfer Sting was. You couldn't help but still love him if you were a fan of him before. And
I would love to go to work every day for a year and just not say a word to anybody, just sit there and watch and get paid for it, and get paid a lot of money for it, like he was during that time frame.
And point a bat at people, and that's good enough for the whole segment, So. But wow, there's no other way to close this, but to just ask you flat out, just give me a prediction. What's gonna happen? Is Sting and Darby gonna win and Sting go into the sunset as champion, or are the Young Bucks gonna ruin the whole damn thing?
Well, I think if it were Triple H or Vince McMahon booking this, Sting would do the honors. He would lose. He'd put over the Bucks. Flair would screw him, and that's his career. Because just like Shawn Michaels did, just like Ric Flair did, you're going to do the honors on your way out. But this being Tony Khan, if he truly is the owner of that company and he has final say, I would put money on that Sting and Darby win. And maybe it's not Flair screwing Sting. Maybe it's Flair being the dirtiest player in the game and helping Sting overcome all odds. And whether it's a death drop or a death lock, Sting gets his hand raised. I don't know who's going to referee that match, probably Aubrey. And I think that I'm going to say Sting's going to go out as champ.
I am in agreement with you. I would love if Flair turned on the Young Bucks of all people and helped Sting win. That seems almost more full circle, that after all these years, somehow Flair helps Sting and they can just ride off into the sunset together, because Flair put him on the map and he can, gradually
here's
take
what
off the
I
map.
want. Here's what I want, and we're recording this before Dynamite.
Absolutely.
I want to see Sting and a Flair face to face on the Go Home Dynamite, and I want him to say something very similar that he said to Ric Flair back before they had that match that we talked about, Flair turning on Sting on Nitro. I want him to look Flair in the face, and I want him to say, "I told you this once before. I'm going to tell you this once again. You're on my side, but if you screw me, I'm going to get you."
That's right. I think they're gonna have an interaction. I'm before the pay-per-view. The idea will be that this episode gets released before Dynamite tomorrow. As you know, I'm just gonna edit some stuff down, and it will totally be available to listen to before then. So these poignant comments will be solidified as before the show. So your prediction is solid and set in stone. Man, Brian, it has been one hell of an episode. I am so glad I ended up reaching out to you. This kind of came up real last minute. I was like, this Sting's. I'm like, oh, Sting's final match, like, oh, whatever. But I'm like, man, this is probably really it. Like, and Tony Khan said it in a tweet. Sting will be around. He'll come back for certain things. But I truly think that now that he has the opportunity to end his career on his terms in a building that he was put on the map in with all the, family, friends, fellow wrestlers and people that he's, grown up with in the business, and just, those competitors that he waged wars with even being there. I think it's just going to be such a moment that I think this truly will be his retirement. And when I realized that, I said to myself, I got to do some sort of collective retrospective on Sting, and it'll be fun to talk about stuff. And I said, I do know a guy who loves Sting more than me, and quite frankly, I think could hang in just bantering back and forth with WCW more than honestly anybody I know, which is great. And it's been a while since Chair Shot Reality ended, but I've been trying to forge ahead with my own, little side deal here, and it's been great reconnecting with you, LeBar, Eisenberg, Rennell, pretty much anybody that I've been able to contact has thrown a straw into the juice box, and it's been a wonderful trip down memory lane and great banter. So, Brian, I really appreciate you being here today and going over our love of Sting together as his career concludes later this weekend. But thanks for being on here. You're welcome anytime in the Juice Box. I'd love to have you on for a sip series. We can discuss overall wrestling instead of just staying in WCW to get a gauge on you as a fan. But that can be, anytime in the future. But I felt that this was definitely appropriate for the time. So, Brian, you have the last word here. What are your final words, final thoughts, Sting's career, and your time here in the Juice Box as we wrap this thing up?
Well, I'll start by saying this has been a lot of fun. I haven't talked wrestling like this in quite some time for this long, right? And the juice is definitely worth the squeeze. But the more that I think about this as you're closing this out, and we talked about where's this going to go on and how's the match going to end, now I'm starting to think this might go on last. And if we're going to have all these visions and people from Sting's past be in attendance, how else do you want him to go out than confetti falling, all his old friends and wrestling in the ring with him, raising his hand as a world heavyweight or a tag team champion? So maybe it is the main event. Maybe he does win. Maybe Tony Khan does all those things right by him that WWE did wrong by him. And I think really that's probably something Tony would like to do for him. So again, you said everything great. It was awesome talking about Sting. It's hard to believe that, 33, 34 years after I started watching him, I'm now 41. His career is coming to an end, and hopefully we see him moving forward, as Tony said. And the only thing for sure about Sting is nothing's for sure.
This has been the Sting Career Retrospective on the Juice Box. He is Brian Gulish. You can find him on Twitter at Brian Gulish, myself at Juicy Steen. hopefully you guys enjoy later this episode, and hopefully you guys will enjoy the prediction show for Revolution. I believe I'll be sitting down with Josh Heisenberg for that. One hell of a weekend coming up. Sting's career, it may be over Sunday, but we'll soak it all in as we watch at the Greensboro Coliseum. This has been the Juice Box. I'll see you guys next week with another edition of this show. And the only thing that I can say now is the only thing that's for sure about the Juice Box is the show is over. See you guys next week. That was the Juice Box with Juice Springsteen. Make sure to subscribe to the Juice Box wherever you listen to podcasts.